We comfort ourselves with the idea of fiction. When we watch a horror movie or read a terrifying novel, there is a safety barrier. We can turn off the TV, close the book, and tell ourselves, it's just a story. We rely on the tropes. The haunted house where footsteps are heard in the attic? That's a scriptwriter's invention. The twins who share a psychic connection so deep it becomes deadly? That's just a plot device. The man who loves a woman so much he brings her back from the dead? That's dark fantasy. But what happens when the barrier breaks? What happens when the most cliché, over-the-top, impossible horror tropes actually happen in the real world? Tonight, we are looking at 4 cases that sound like they were ripped straight from the pages of a cheap horror paperback. They are too grotesque, too perfectly plotted, and too strange to be real. But they are. We have the police reports, the medical records, and the bodies to prove it. These are 4 creepy stories that sound completely fake, but are 100% terrifyingly true. The concept of evil twins, or twins with a supernatural, telepathic bond, is a staple of horror. From The Shining to Dead Ringers, we are fascinated by the idea of 2 people sharing one soul. But no work of fiction has ever come close to the bizarre, tragic, and inexplicable reality of June and Jennifer Gibbons. Born in 1963, June and Jennifer grew up in Wales. From a very young age, they realized the world didn't understand them, and in turn, they rejected the world. They stopped speaking to adults. They stopped speaking to other children. Eventually, they stopped speaking to anyone at all, except each other. But it wasn't just a refusal to speak. They developed a private language, a high-speed patois that was unintelligible to anyone listening. They moved in perfect synchronization. If one scratched her nose, the other would scratch her nose. If one took a step, the other matched it. It wasn't rehearsed. It was organic, like a hive mind operating 2 bodies. Their parents, terrified and confused, tried to separate them. They were sent to different boarding schools. But the separation caused them to enter a catatonic state. They froze. They wouldn't move or eat until they were reunited. As they grew into teenagers, their bond turned dark. They began to commit crimes, arson, petty theft, always together, always in that eerie, silent sink. They were eventually committed to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. For 11 years, they lived in a small room, writing prolific, disturbing diaries. And it was in these diaries that the true horror of their bond was revealed. They didn't just love each other, they were enslaved by each other. Jennifer wrote, "We have become a fatal, fatal enemy in each other's eyes. We feel the irritating, deadly rays coming out of our bodies, stinging each other's skin. I say to myself, can I get rid of my own shadow?" They believed that one of them had to die for the other to truly live. They believed their souls were too entangled, that there wasn't enough life force for both of them. So, they made a pact that sounds like the climax of a supernatural thriller. In 1993, they were finally being transferred to a lower security clinic. As the bus began to move, Jennifer slept on June's shoulder. She looked at her sister and said, "At long last, we're out." Moments later, Jennifer Gibbons slumped over. She was dead. She was 29 years old. She was physically healthy. The autopsy revealed she had died of acute myocarditis, a sudden inflammation of the heart. There were no drugs in her system, no signs of foul play. Her heart had simply stopped. But the story doesn't end there. After Jennifer's death, June, the surviving twin, began to speak. She spoke clearly, confidently, to everyone. This silent twin vanished the moment her sister died. Days after the death, June reportedly said, "I'm free at last, and at last Jennifer has gave up her life for me." They had decided which one would die. They had agreed upon it. And then, through sheer force of will or some connection that science cannot explain, Jennifer turned her own heart off so her sister could have a life. It sounds like a ghost story, but the grave of Jennifer Gibbons is very, very real. If I told you a story about a mad scientist who falls in love with a dying patient, steals her body from the grave, and lives with her corpse as his wife for 7 years, you would say it's a rip-off of Frankenstein or Psycho. You'd say it's too grotesque to be believable. But in Key West, Florida, In the 1930s, this was the daily life of Carl Tanzler. Tanzler was a radiologist who worked at a marine hospital. He was an eccentric man who claimed he had been visited by the spirit of a dead ancestor who revealed the face of his true love to him. In 1930, a young Cuban-American woman named Elena de Hoyos walked into the hospital. She had tuberculosis. She was beautiful, and she had the face from Tanzler's vision. He became obsessed. He tried to cure her with bizarre homemade elixirs and X-ray treatments. But in 1931, Elena died. Tanzler was devastated. He paid for her funeral and built her an expensive stone mausoleum. He visited her grave every single night. For 2 years, people thought it was a sad, romantic gesture. But one night in 1933, Tanzler stopped visiting the grave. The town assumed he had moved on. He hadn't. Under the cover of darkness, Tanzler had broken into the mausoleum, loaded Elena's decaying body into a toy wagon, and dragged her home. This is where the story shifts from sad to abject nightmare. Elena's body was, naturally, decomposing. To keep his bride looking beautiful, Tanzler began a process of horrific preservation. He wired her bones together with piano wire and coat hangers to keep her structure intact. As her skin rotted away, he replaced it with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster. He replaced her eyes with glass orbs. He made a wig for her out of her own hair, which her mother had given him after the funeral. To mask the smell of decomposition, he used gallons of perfume and formaldehyde. For 7 years, Carl Tanzler lived with this wax mummy hybrid of a woman. He slept in the same bed with her. He danced with her. He played music for her. He truly believed they were happily married. The horror movie reveal came in 1940. Elena's sister, hearing rumors that Tanzler was sleeping with a giant doll, went to his house to investigate. She pushed past him, entered the bedroom, and found the thing in the bed. It was wearing Elena's clothes. It had Elena's hair. But beneath the wax mask was the skeletal grimace of her dead sister. When the authorities performed an autopsy on the doll, they found something even more disturbing. Tanzler had inserted a paper tube into the torso of the corpse, allowing him to consummate the marriage. Tanzler was arrested, but the statute of limitations on grave robbing had expired, so he was released. He lived out the rest of his days alone. Well, not entirely alone. He built a life-sized effigy of Elena, using the death mask he had created from her face, and lived with that until he died. It is a story so depraved, so gothic, and so incredibly specific in its madness that it feels scripted. But the photos of the doll, standing stiffly in Tanzler's living room, are widely available, and they are the stuff of nightmares. The haunted house trope is the most common cliché in horror. A family moves into an isolated farm. They hear strange noises in the attic. Items go missing. They find footprints in the snow that shouldn't be there. The maid quits because she says the house is cursed. It's the plot of The Conjuring, the Amityville Horror, and Signs. But in 1922, in Germany, this script played out in real life, and it ended in a massacre that remains unsolved to this day. The Gruber family lived on a remote farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, about 40 miles north of Munich. It was Andreas Gruber, his wife Casilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her 2 children, Casilia, 7, and Joseph, 2. In late 1921, the family's maid abruptly quit. She fled the house in terror, telling anyone who would listen that the farm was haunted. She heard footsteps in the attic at night. She heard voices. She felt she was being watched. The family dismissed her as superstitious. But in March of 1922, Andreas Gruber began to notice things. Strange things. One morning after a snowfall, he found footprints leading out of the dense forest and toward the house. But there were no footprints leading back. Someone had walked to the house and apparently never left. Andreas searched the barn and the tool shed. He found nothing. Then, keys to the house went missing. A newspaper that no one in the family subscribed to was found on the porch. Scratches appeared on the lock of the tool shed, as if someone had tried to pick it. And at night, the footsteps in the attic returned. Thump, 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 right above their heads. Andreas told his neighbors about these events, but he was a stubborn man and refused to call the police. On March 31st, a Friday, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm. It was her first day. It would also be her last. That evening, one by one, the 4 adult members of the household were lured into the barn. We don't know how or why, but forensic reconstruction shows that they were killed instantly, one after another, with a mattock, a pickaxe-like tool used for digging. The killer piled their bodies on top of each other in the hay, covered them with a door, and then went into the house. Inside, he found the new maid in her bedroom and killed her. Then, he found 2-year-old Joseph sleeping in his cot. He killed him with a single blow. This is a brutal murder, but here is where it becomes a horror movie. The killer didn't leave. The bodies were discovered 4 days later, on April 4th. But subsequent investigations revealed that the fireplace had been used after the murders. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney on Saturday and Sunday. The cattle in the barn had been fed. There was food eaten from the pantry. The killer, the man who had left the footprints in the snow, had been living in the attic. He had been watching them for days, maybe weeks. He killed them all, and then he simply stayed. He lived in their house, ate their food, and warmed himself by their fire while their bodies lay cooling in the barn a few yards away. The case was never solved. The police interviewed hundreds of suspects, but no one was ever charged. To this day, Hinterkaifeck stands as the ultimate haunted house story because the ghost wasn't a spirit. It was a man with a pickaxe living in the ceiling. Reincarnation is a difficult subject. It usually falls into the realm of spiritualism or fantasy movies. The idea that a soul can return, intact, into a new body is something skeptics dismiss instantly. But there is one case, the case of the Pollock Twins, that made even the most hardened skeptics pause. It is a story so full of impossible coincidences that it feels like bad writing. In 1957, in Hexham, England, John and Florence Pollock suffered a tragedy. Their 2 daughters, Joanna, 11, and Jacqueline, 6, were walking to church when they were struck by a car and killed instantly. The parents were destroyed. John, a devout Catholic, began to pray intensely, not just for peace, but for his daughters to return. He told his wife that their girls would be born again. Florence dismissed this as grief-stricken nonsense. A year later, Florence became pregnant. To the doctor's surprise, she was carrying twins. On October 4th, 1958, Gillian and Jennifer Pollock were born. Here is where the fiction begins to bleed into reality. When the twins were born, Jennifer had a distinctive white-lined birthmark across her forehead. It was the exact same shape and location as a scar her deceased sister, Jacqueline, had gotten from falling off a bike. Jennifer also had a birthmark on her leg, identical to a birthmark Jacqueline had. As the girls grew, the coincidences became impossible. They asked for toys that had belonged to their dead sisters, toys that had been boxed up in the attic before they were born. They didn't just ask for a doll. They named the dolls by the specific names Joanna and Jacqueline had given them, Mary and Suzanne. When the family moved back to Hexham, they had moved away after the accident. The twins, now 4 years old, began to point out landmarks they had never seen. "That's the school we went to," they said. "That's the playground where we used to play." They knew the way to the park without ever being shown. But the most chilling behavior was their phobia. The twins were terrified of cars. When a car would idle nearby, they would scream, clinging to each other, yelling, "The car is coming to get us." Even stranger, they would play a dark game. John Pollock once walked in on them playing on the floor. One twin lay with her head in the other's lap. The sitting twin was stroking her hair and saying, "The blood is coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." This continued until the girls turned 5. At that age, experts in reincarnation say memories of past lives tend to fade. And exactly on schedule, the memories stopped. The birthmarks remained, but the knowledge of the old life vanished. They grew up as normal women, with no memory of being Joanna and Jacqueline. In a movie, this would be the setup for a ghost possession. In reality, it is a documented medical mystery. The scars, the specific knowledge of hidden toys, the recognition of places they had never been. It defies genetics. It defies coincidence. It implies that the grieving father's prayer was answered in the most literal, unsettling way possible. That the previous draft of the script wasn't thrown away, it was just rewritten into a new body. Outro. These 4 stories remind us that the human imagination is limited. We write stories about ghosts and monsters because we want to contain the fear. We want to give it a structure, a beginning, and an end. But reality has no scriptwriters. Reality doesn't care about plot holes or believability. Reality is the twins who die to set each other free. It is the man who turns a corpse into a doll. It is the killer living in the attic above your head. And it is the children who remembered dying before they were born. So the next time you say, "That could never happen," just remember, it already did.